The internet, it's such a ubiquitous part of our everyday lives, from our smartphones to our smart TVs, from the way we shop online to the way we get our news, like here. But have you ever stopped to think, where did the internet come from? No, Al Gore did not invent it. And who controls it? Who controls this World Wide Web? Well, the answer is us, the United States. But it looks like we may not be in control after September 2015. On Friday, the Obama administration announced it plans to relinquish federal government control over the management of the internet to a yet-to-be-formed international body that would be overseen by ICANN. Who is ICANN and where did it come from? Well, ICANN, otherwise known as the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is a nonprofit organization under which the Department of Commerce had a contract since 1998. They're in charge of handing out domain names and web addresses for the entire internet, among other technical aspects of managing it. Now let's take a look at this, a little bit of the history of the internet to see how we got here. This is very abbreviated, but you have the internet. It was basically started by the Defense Department in the 1960s, and then it was run for almost 30 years by a gentleman named John Postel at the Information Sciences Institute at USC in California, where he developed something called the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, or the IANA. Now, after he died in 1998, the IANA fell under the Commerce Department's contract with ICANN, which, as I stated before, manages the worldwide resources that govern the internet. So things like domain names, IP address, the root server operations, the things that, basics.govs, things like that for the internet. Now, according to the Washington Post, this move is pleasing to longtime international critics of U.S. control. But it's alarming to many others who think this is a hastily and politically tinged move to placate international suspicion of the United States after the Edward Snowden revelations about the NSA surveillance programs last year. Now, the president of ICANN, he maintains this transition is a good thing, claiming nothing will be done in any way to jeopardize the security or stability of the internet, but it will now be incorporated into the entire global community. He's all about globalization. Take a listen.
What will change is how will the entire community, the global community, as equal partners across all sectors, including governments, have the confidence that we are performing our functions in an accountable, transparent way according to the wishes of the global community.
Others aren't so sure. Now, lack of adequate transparency and accountability are already of great concern, even under U.S. control now. Steve Del Bianco, executive director of the internet advocacy group NetChoice, he said it's inconceivable that ICANN can be accountable to the whole world. That's the equivalent of being accountable to no one. Well, joining us tonight is Berin Szoka, president and founder of TechFreedom, a technology policy think tank. Thank you for joining us, Berin.
Thank you.
So my question to you is, in plain language, how does this affect the everyday average person with the internet? Because I know we can get into all kinds of technical terms and my eyes will glaze over. But what does this mean for the average person in America and control of the internet? Should we be worried?
Well, I'm not particularly worried about this step. I'm worried about ICANN more generally. So all that's happened here today or last week is that the administration completed this process that was begun 15 years ago in agreeing to turn over administration of that IANA function. That's the control of the server that matches up numbers behind the internet to the domain names that we all know and love so well, things like .com. So right now, the U.S. government plays a role in making sure that ICANN administers that properly. And what they proposed last week was that the U.S. government would step out of that process. Now, that has been interpreted widely as the U.S. government ceding control. That's not exactly true, because at the end of the day, ICANN still is subject to two other important forms of U.S. government accountability, and those won't change here. And just briefly, those two things are, one, here, the root server would still be administered by a U.S. company called VeriSign, and that company still would have an agreement with the Department of Commerce that would still subject them to accountability. And two, ICANN, that international nonprofit that administers the domain name system today, is still a U.S. corporation, and they're still subject to U.S. jurisdiction, and they can be sued in the courts.
But let me
and even
ask
though
you,
they're talking about changing that, they could still be sued in the future.
Okay, well, that's an important point. Thank God for that. But my question to you, though, is the idea of globalization and the fact that, for example, in the Montevideo agreement, this whole concept of we need to, that the relationship between ICANN and the United States is no longer sustainable, and that we need to move toward a more globalization management of the internet. Doesn't that raise some security concerns for you too, as far as cyber attacks and other countries like Russia and China that are trying to get in there and kind of control what's going on here? Doesn't that diminish our authority and oversight over those kinds of things?
Maybe. I don't think anybody really disagrees with that ultimate goal. That's been bipartisan policy for 15 years. The critical question is how it's done. And so today, what we're starting is a process that really begs the fundamental question, which is the one that Steve raised. It's about accountability for ICANN. So I think it's a mistake to get too focused on this idea that the administration has just given up control over the internet. What really is important is that going forward, there's a framework in place to make sure that ICANN is actually accountable to somebody, and importantly, that the door isn't open for a takeover by foreign governments like Russia and China, who last year allied with certain European companies to propose a radically different internet governance structure that would really be run by an organ of the United Nations.
Right.
That's something that nobody in the U.S. wants.
So, Berin, let me just get this straight, and I think I understand. So I think it's fascinating, by the way, that the DNS, the assignment of domain names to various corporations or companies or individuals that apply for a website, used to be handled by one guy, this John Postor. I find that fascinating. And then it transferred over to this concept, this company called ICANN, and they handle it now. And I hear what you're saying, that it doesn't functionally change that relationship, that fact yet. So we're taking the Department of Commerce out of the equation. They're gonna no longer oversee ICANN. So what were they doing in the past? If we're losing the Department of Commerce's influence or oversight and transferring that to some global entity, what is it specifically we're losing? What did they do?
Sure. So today, the way this works is that if ICANN, for example, wants to add new top-level domains like .books, for example, they have a process for doing that, and at the end of the day, when they've awarded a contract to somebody to run the .books registry, they have to go first to the Department of Commerce to make sure that they've crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's, and when they've done that, and then if the Department of Commerce says yes, then VeriSign makes the change in the root server. And so all that would change here is that ICANN would go directly to VeriSign, but as I said, VeriSign is still subject to U.S. government control. So
I got it. So to tie this back to the current news cycle, Buck, did you see the story this past week about various congressmen raising concerns over the new extension .sucks?
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah.
This is why the U.S. government is discussing why or why not .sucks is appropriate or not.
I was not familiar with the .sucks story, but
But apparently there's 1,000 now new domain names that ICANN is presiding over, and some people are complaining that there's an unfair advantage to U.S. companies because of how much they control the internet, like Facebook and Google and things like that.
Look, the fact that the politics of this are somehow enmeshed with the Snowden revelations, I think, is interesting, just because there's so much hypocrisy with all these foreign governments who spy on their people so much more than even, believe it or not, Americans get spied on by their own government. The only limitation in a vast majority of countries in the world on how much data they will collect on their citizens is literally their technological capability. So they're on the one side saying to us, oh, well, you're using this for surveillance and for all these intrusive practices, but really out of the other side of their mouth, they want more control over the internet in their own way if they can get it, so they can spy more on their people and us at the same time.
Listen,
it doesn't seem like this is a huge shift, but we have to keep that in mind as we go further down this path.
But you know what, Allison, this is my concern about this. I think that it's true that this is a knee-jerk reaction. Some people say that this has been going on for a while, that this transition was in place, coming for a while. But it just seems awfully coincidental that after the Edward Snowden NSA revelations, that the international community got very suspect of the United States' ability to be a good steward of the internet, and that this is another capitulation by the Obama administration to the wants and needs to be liked by the international community.
And if that's the case, I think that's a bad idea. If it is the case that perhaps they maybe stepped on the gas in the last second because of that to go ahead and implement that, then I would certainly think that's the wrong strategy. But what's interesting to me about this whole debate is, despite my age, I'm very much not tech savvy at all. So this whole thing is very confusing to me, but still interesting. But my understanding is the original purpose of the internet was it was supposed to be this utopian place that was completely removed from government intervention at all. And it was supposed to be a completely free area where they could kind of interact and do whatever they wanted. And then it quickly became a place that was clearly not. So I'm not sure we'll lose entire control of it even now.
Well, did you want to get anything real quick?
Yeah, no, it's just that my question is this globalization, or is this actually parcel up control so that countries can govern the internet in their own country, which to me is sort of the opposite of globalization.
Anti-globalization.
Right, that's so I'm confused. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's something, we touched on it a little bit. It's something we should definitely be paying attention to because they kind of slipped it in on us right before the weekend, and we'll keep an eye on this. Anytime I hear globalization, it makes me a little bit nervous. Berin, thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Sure.
News that the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was likely a deliberate act has raised more questions than it's answered. We'll have the latest developments in tonight's Q&A.